evening, everyone. Thanks for joining in today's live session. I'll be talking today about um, my struggles with the ARE CE exam. Thank you to everyone who's joining from RMSM Studios. The main reason I wanted to share this is because I recently released my CE Pass blog post. I normally do uh, a detailed blog post every time I pass an exam. And I did the one on CE this past week, and I felt like CE is a bit unique for me in that it's the first exam that I failed. And because of that, I felt like a lot of people would probably have the same challenges that I had, the same confusions that I had. And so I wanted to talk about sort of what I went through. Give me just a second. See if I can get this to work. Just gonna see if I can get my screen share going. If not, then I'll just talk. Okay. Does not look like it's gonna let me share my screen, but that's also okay. I can just talk about what I'm going through. So just to give a quick overview, what I'm going to be talking about today will be my struggles with the CE exam, recovering from my fail, and how to move forward, or if you're looking for extra guidance, stuff that you can do. So first, the first struggle that I had with this exam was with the NCARB reference matrix. And I've actually been a part of some sessions, live sessions with NCARB members or employees that work at NCARB. And I've brought up this issue to them in that the NCARB reference matrix does not reference any textbooks that deal with construction details for the CE exam. And I feel like this is a huge problem. I know that the ARE isn't supposed to be a testing exam. However, I feel like it's a pretty big issue in that the testers aren't being given a reference that deals specifically with the construction details that are such a large part of this actual exam. So that was my major problem, that, architectural graphic standards, not listed. Building codes, illustrated, not listed. Building construction illustrated, not listed. None of those three books are listed for the CE exam, not for the previous version of the handbook, and not for the new online proctoring version of the handbook. And I think that's a pretty big problem. And so when people mention that, oh, you need to know the construction details for this exam, I was like, okay, it's probably not that big of a deal. It's not that large of a section of this exam. Maybe it's only something I need to look at for PPD and PDD, but that is not the case. It was much larger of a section. And I feel like that is what in large part contributed to my initial fail, that I thought I knew what was going to be on the exam, and that was not the case. Some people are saying the volume is a bit low. Closer. I'll talk a bit louder so you guys can hear me. Hello, is that better? Let me know if the volume's a bit better. But for now, I'll keep going. Another issue that I had, or a struggle that I had with the second attempt that I had for construction evaluation, was not losing focus because I had failed. So in my initial take of the CE exam, I focused a lot on the contracts, a lot on the professional practice portion of the exam, and I think that's definitely still good. I think you should definitely still do that. Reading lots of AHPP, listening to the Ship Harden lectures, but I feel like when people fail an exam, they sort of immediately want to look at that score report, the NCARB score report, and see exactly where they went wrong and try and remedy just that section. Okay, great. Thanks, guys. Yeah, they want to remedy just that section. And I think that's a problem. I think that's the opposite way you should do it because you're still taking the entire exam. Even if you failed one section, you're still taking the entire exam. So if you fail a section, you should always make sure you look back at every objective, not just one objective. So one thing I did to make sure I didn't lose focus on the contracts in my second attempt was to make sure that I was reading up a lot on the contracts and reinforcing my knowledge. Hyperfine had some great exercises on the contracts. Normally, how I study for Hyperfine or with Hyperfine, I do the references first. I read the references so I know what I'm doing before I do the assignment because otherwise I have no idea what I'm talking about. I'll just put I don't know on all the answers. But for CE, on the second attempt, since I'd read so much about contracts, I felt like I could do Hyperfine more as like a practice question or like a pop quiz where I can actually do the question first, then read the reference because I felt comfortable enough with contracts by that point. Another good way that I studied contracts for CE was using the Young Architect Academy course. I think they have an intro to contracts for PCM, PJM, and CE. So I initially bought that course when I passed my project management exam. And I figured, it's the same contracts, and actually CE has slightly more contracts than PJM does. I think PJM has like, how many is that? It has like 8 and CE has like 10 contracts. So I felt like using that course again would be very helpful for me and sort of condense it. CE has many contracts, but a lot of them are really simple. It's just figuring out exactly how to use it. And I'll get into using it in a second. So we're technically still on things I struggled with. So another aspect that I struggled with was the lack of good CE practice questions, especially for the construction details portion. And I think this is sort of an issue that exists with multiple ARE exam prep providers. Um, I felt like a lot of questions dealt more with the professional practice version or portion of the exam, and so I wasn't really able to learn so much the construction details. I felt like that was something I had to generate for myself. And I think that's something I've talked about in an earlier video I did on studying for construction details. You can find that on my YouTube page. And yeah, I really struggled with finding a study material that talked about it or a practice exam that talked about it because even the ballast practice exam for CE still doesn't have as many of those construction detail questions as you might want to get really familiar with it, and especially if you don't have a lot of existing construction administration experience. And I had that same problem with the Kaplan materials, the Brightwood materials. I used the Kaplan 4.0 textbooks for my second attempt because basically I went out and bought as many things as I could after I failed. Um, and even their textbook focuses more on those sort of professional practice aspects, the shop drawings, but not what they look like, more about how they're created and who's responsible for them. And all that is very important for the exam, but it wasn't talking about exactly what I wanted to know. Another struggle that I had personally with this exam is that I felt like a lot of the test questions were skewed towards residential buildings. And for me, this was a big issue because I don't have a lot of experience in residential construction. I was previously working in Africa before I moved back to the States, but even when I was working there, I was doing mostly institutional, commercial, healthcare projects that use very little to no like wood framing. And I basically had to sort of relearn all of that stuff again from when I was in college. And I felt like that was kind of a problem because one of the things about the ARE is the idea is that you're supposed to take it after you've gained all of your experience. But if a lot of the stuff is skewed towards residential buildings or residential construction, it can be a bit of an issue, and I feel like it won't reflect your actual experience. So that was a struggle that I had, and I'll talk about how I combated that in a moment. Another issue that I had was continuing to study for other exams. So obviously, when you fail, you try to fill that gap in with another exam. And the way that I did that was with the project management exam. I actually took it in between my my initial fail and my pass for CE. And I was kind of worried that, the time I was taking to study it, I was losing knowledge that I had gained for the actual CE exam. So I was really worried about that, but I was also kind of relieved in that, since you're still going through contracts, you're still keeping some of that knowledge. But that was another struggle I had. And another part of the exam that was difficult to find was sections on cost estimating. It was really difficult finding references for that dealing specifically with architecture and the ARE. And I've actually had that same issue looking for content for PPD. PPD has a whole objective dedicated to costing, project costing, material comparison, and even that, like looking in the NCARB ARE community, people have definitely struggled trying to find that information for the exam or specifically for the exam. So my final struggle, well, technically not final, but my last struggle that I had with the CE exam was the overall testing timeline because I was really worried about failing and how it would affect my timeline, my personal timeline in terms of the ARE, because my goal is to pass before the transition in summer 2021. So I was really worried in terms of, if I fail CE again, does that mean that I have to do the online version later? Like all those things were really bothering me at the time. And so let me go into recovering from my fail. Or actually, does anyone have any questions or things they want me to talk about before I get into that section? You can leave it in the comments. We're going to do a larger Q&A section at the end, but no questions so far? Okay, that's fine. So let me go into recovering from my fail. So failing was really hard for me. It was the first exam I had ever failed, and I didn't really know how to bounce back. And to a certain extent, I felt like my lack of experience in construction administration was part of the reason. And I didn't know how to remedy that because of the projects I was working on, in the office. It's very difficult to sort of be like, hey, can you give me a construction project for the next 1 month while I try and take this exam? Like, no firm's going to let you do that. So I had to kind of figure out how to fill in my gaps myself. So I'll talk a little bit about that. So one of my main ways was increasing focus on construction details. Let me actually bring up my Clockify guide. I use Clockify to track my time, and I have it broken down for each exam actually. So if I go to CE second take, I actually studied Building Construction Illustrated for about 8 hours in my second take of this exam. Case studies. So case studies, I'll also get to that in a second. Um, so yeah, in terms of the construction details, I tried to read Building Construction Illustrated as much as I could. You can also look at architecture graphic standards. I use Building Construction Illustrated, and it really helped me sort of learn and identify the different parts of the building that I was kind of rusty on. And like I said, that sort of focus on residential construction and smaller scale buildings made it a bit more difficult. Like, I think a lot of things in terms of thermal protection and stuff like that, a lot of that stuff could be more applicable to residential stuff than commercial stuff. or at least the stuff that I was doing. Um, and what I also did, which was very helpful, was to go through Building Construction Illustrated and to try and redraw the details that I saw by hand. And I think for architects who are very visual people, it's a great tool to really learn what each layer of the building is about. Another resource that I use, I think I also mentioned it in my blog post, was Hammer in Hand. That website was very instrumental because in terms of construction details, what you're going to be focusing on most is the foundations and earthwork and the thermal protection and water protection. Those are the major sections, and that's what Hammer in Hand covers in their best practice manual. So make sure you go and have a look at my blog post and really, really look at their sections. They're 3D in color, so it makes it really easy to see the different layers. And it's for different parts of the building. So it's for the foundation, it's for the roof, for parapet walls. They have all of those different sections there. So make sure you go through the whole thing. Um, yeah, and I had someone ask about case studies. Oh, what parts of Construction Illustrated did you recommend? So I think that would be chapter 3 and chapter 7 in my book. So that I think that's the earthwork. I have a digital version, so I can actually check for you right now. Um, I think it's chapter 3 and chapter 7. It's in here somewhere. So yeah, 3 foundation systems and 7 moisture and thermal protection, and I have the 5th edition. Mhm. And obviously for architectural graphic standards, their chapter arrangement will be a bit different, but those are the chapters that I used. And you can also look at the NCARB ARE community and see what their recommendations are for architectural graphic standards specifically. But since I had Building Construction Illustrated, that's what I used. And someone had a question about case studies specifically. So for case studies, the way that I studied for them, I don't want to really talk about, the specifics of any case study or any exam portion, but just talking in general, you're going to have to look at plans as part of your case study. Um, and obviously I can't go into what those will be, but I think the best practice for that is to actually look at plans. In my blog post, I mentioned that I downloaded copies of different cities, plan information for when they're doing bidding, like if they're sending out drawings for bidding, they actually have full PDF sets online that you can download. So I actually downloaded a whole bunch of them. I created like a Google Drive folder of different construction drawing sets from around the internet. I think at some point I even tried to find construction details for a Zaha Hadid building, just to sort of get an idea and get really in depth, really interested in how they looked, and what I might experience on the exam. And I tried to look for full plan sets for a variety of building types because you never know what they might bring up on the case study itself. It could be a house, could be a school, could be an office building, you never know. So try and make sure that you look at different buildings, different construction types. And I think that would be really great help for case studies. So it's essentially specifications, project manuals, construction drawing sets, all of that are part of the larger document set that are part of CE. So I think there's a diagram for when you're studying CE. And now, of course, I've completely forgotten it because I've passed it and now my brain is useless. Let me see if I can find a copy of it. But essentially that construction drawing set, or what you would issue for bidding, that's what you should be looking at. And I mean, specifications are also what's talking about the master format divisions. So you should be able to read a set of specifications, and know where to go exactly. Like, is it a concrete specification? What are the admixtures you can add, stuff like that, you know. You need to be able to read those documents and know how to go through that. I think the Kaplan textbook covered that pretty well compared to some other resources. They're really good, I think, on describing specific documents and how to use them. But in terms of the actual examples of those documents, you're better off going online. So I actually went online and I searched for project specifications or building specifications and project manuals. Like I think I found like a military project manual for one of their building construction projects. So Google is your best friend, honestly, with this exam. You're not gonna find this stuff in a lot of resources, and that's what I struggled with, that you need to go out and find the stuff to help you pass this exam. Um, yes, so another way that I did that is by watching videos of actual construction. If you go to my YouTube page, RMSM Studio on YouTube, I have a playlist specifically for construction evaluation, and I created it while I was studying for it to help fill in my gaps in terms of those different construction methods. Like I said, I didn't have a lot of experience in residential construction. So my remedy for that was looking at videos of people building houses, you know, from the ground up. What does it look like in terms of developing the site, clearing the site, um, and those two chapters of Building Construction Illustrated, you know, just search, you know, earthwork, just search thermal and moisture protection online, and you can find some really great sources. Um, and the YouTube playlist that I have is pretty comprehensive in terms of the different stuff I looked at. What you'll need to focus on will vary based off of the level of experience that you have. Um, so I knew what my gaps were, and I made that playlist with those gaps in mind. Maybe your gaps are a bit different, so maybe you need to create your own playlist or add on. I don't think you can add on to my playlist, but you know, create your own playlist to look at things and find out different stuff. And I think something I mentioned in one of my other videos is that ultimately mastering this subject or mastering this knowledge is something that will only help you move forward. And you know, even if you get specific about um, specific elements that are relevant to your business or your subject area. For example, I know people in my study group who work specifically in healthcare, and so they study and look up resources for construction evaluation with healthcare in mind. They look at the building of hospitals, specifications for hospitals, just because not only is that more interesting for them, but they're also more likely to see that in their everyday life. So make sure that you keep that in mind. Um, so talking about my study group, try if you can to join or create an ARE study group. Um, I have another YouTube video on how to create an effective study group on my YouTube page, and you can probably find it on the Facebook page as well. One of the reasons why I felt like this was really important is because my study group has been very instrumental in helping me pass this exam. Um, of the group in that I had at the time, all of us who studied for it passed. And I thought that was really great, and I felt like it really showed how well what we were doing was working. And another great reason to have a study group is because we all have sort of different focus areas within architecture. You know, some of us are doing modular construction, some of us are doing transit, some of us are doing healthcare, you know, and everybody brings that knowledge to the table, and they can talk about it from their different points of view. So what they've seen in their office, the best practices, and how it relates to this exam and all exams really is something that really you can't get from any textbook, because it's sort of getting everybody's experiences in a way that's very helpful. And of course, having that group, that accountability is very helpful, keeping you sort of on task and trying to learn and grow together. Um, and sort of part of not losing focus on a specific subject area. So I know I've talked a lot about the construction detail portion of this exam. It is still important to know your contracts back and forth for this exam. It's still very critical. I know that I was talking a lot about, you know, these details, but these contracts, I think B101, A201 are still very critical. So if you have any free time, dedicate it to contracts. And I think the interesting thing about contracts versus the construction details, I feel like contracts are sort of easier to study on the go. I work full time, so I need to find time around my work schedule to study. I find that finding resources to study contracts because of PCM and PJM, it's much easier. You can find audio lectures, you can find Shift Harden lectures, you can find multiple resources that can help you study contracts in your spare time or very quickly. Construction details doesn't really exist. Like you have to set time aside to read Building Construction Illustrated or to read Architectural Graphic Standards or to read a full construction drawing set. Like I think um, one of the times that my study group got together, looked at a full construction drawing set, we were sitting there for hours and we went through the entire set from like site plan to electrical details. These things take time. And another thing that I want to add is that you need to start looking at these early. So if you're at the beginning of um, your CE exam study process, and this is great knowledge for you to have right now. You should start reading Building Construction Illustrated right now. Do not leave it until 1 week or 2 weeks even before your exam because I know it's just chapter 3 and chapter 7, but there is a lot of content in there to digest and really understand. And if you know that it's a problem area for you, then I think that's all the more reason. Unless you know you have like lots of free time available, you need to make time and space in your study schedule to study that section of the exam. So Gloria had a question. So trying to familiarize a wall section from footing and up to the roof or parapet in terms of commercial will be helpful. In terms of all types of buildings, like I'm saying, you should try and look at as many different types of building. There's many different construction types. If it's, wood frame, if it's steel. I think at some point we saw like a small little, like a patio or like a, what exactly was it? It was like some type of shelter, picnic shelter. I think we found like an RFP for a picnic shelter and went through those construction drawings. There weren't a lot of them, but it was still very interesting seeing how the set was put together for something so small and also how it was built. It was attached to something else, so it was still kind of an interesting set, but you should look at as many different types of building as you can, so not specific to just one. Okay. And another recommendation I would give in terms of recovering from my fail is to test yourself constantly. I looked at multiple practice exams. Um, excuse me. WeARE is one that I use a lot. It's, I think, slightly more difficult than Designer Hacks. I use Designer Hacks as well. It's really great for the short quizzes. Um, but I guess I felt like after I failed, like a lot of the stuff that's on the Designer Hacks, it is that very not construction, sorry, professional practice portion of the exam, and then not as much on the sections that I wanted or wanted to improve upon. I also used the Ballast practice exam, and also I had the Kaplan material, so I used the Kaplan practice test as well. So just trying to test yourself as much as possible with as many different resources as possible, because if you think about it, this exam is kind of broad, trying to fit all of the different types of construction into one little exam. Um, it's a lot, you know. Um, so I would really recommend that you try and practice as much as possible. Okay, so last thing, if you're looking for more guidance on this, I am doing a live course starting next week, CE Studio. I might have mentioned it a couple of times. And so it's a 4-week live training. So if you're looking for more guidance on CE, I'm going to be going over some essential concepts, including contracts, including drawings, including estimation, including project management. So if you're looking for more help in terms of those topics, because I know that's what I struggled with, and a lot of people that I've spoken to have struggled with those sections, Definitely take a look. If you look at my website, just go top right to CE Studio. It'll give you more information. All right, so that's the end of my presentation. It's 7:01. Does anyone have any further questions? I'm completely open to questions. I'll also wait a bit because it sometimes takes people a while to type. What did you study for case studies? So I didn't study separately for case studies. That's sort of an important thing to remember. Each version of the exam is different. I would say that the construction drawing sets, the full construction drawing sets helped a lot, but in theory, a case study question could be on anything. And what I've noticed is also some of the case study questions are not really related to the main problem at all. Some of them can be very generic questions, sort of disguised within a case study. And one of my tactics that I use nowadays when I'm doing a case study is I'll actually read through all the questions in a case study very quickly and try and see if there's any like gimme questions, any super easy questions I could answer quickly. Because all questions, case study or not, are worth 1 point. So if there are super easy questions in a case study that aren't really related to the main question and can be answered easily, then I'm going to answer them immediately before going to all the really time-consuming ones because you're fighting both the question and the clock with the ARE. So that's kind of how I strategize for case studies. I don't study for them separately. But I do think the ballast practice exam, I think it does include some case studies for each of its exams for the individual exam divisions, so you can also check that out there. But again, it's just 2 case studies for that whole book, so it depends if you think if it's worth it. Hope that answers the question. All right, any other questions? Welcome, Gloria. All right, it does not look like I have any other questions, so again, thank you to everybody who joined in on this session. Make sure to follow on RMSM Studio Facebook and also the YouTube page. And feel free to sign up for my mailing list. I think I mostly shared about this Facebook Live session on my mailing list. Um, Actually, I do have one more question. Hold on. Optimal duration for studying and comfortably preparing. Um, in answer to this question, I normally say it depends on your level of experience in CA specifically. Generally, I give about 2 months for studying for CE. The reason why my CE Studio training course is only 1 month is because it's just focused on the essential concepts. I'm not trying to teach people everything for CE because that would take a lot of time and way more than 1.5 hours a week. But I usually recommend about 2 months because I feel like that's enough time to get really deep on both the contracts and project management section and to get really deep on the construction detail section. It's very comfortable, especially if you work full time and you have other stuff going on in your life. It gives you space to not feel so rushed because I feel like on the first time I took CE, I did try to look through Building Construction Illustrated, but it was really only the week before my exam, and it was simply not enough time. It was just not enough time and I was just full of so much regret after I took the exam, and I was just like, I should have given myself more time um, with that specific resource. So yeah, hope that answers the question. Um, Thanks everyone who joined, and yeah, make sure to keep an eye out for my content, join my mailing list, and thank you so much for being a part of this. I hope you all have a great Thanksgiving. If you have any more questions, you can leave them in the comments or send me a message on Facebook Messenger, and I'll definitely try and get back to you. All right. Hope you all have a great night. Oh, a session on PCM. Um, I think I could. Um, yeah, I'll just have to see in terms of my schedule, with the holidays coming up. But I'll post about it in my mailing list as well. So if you guys subscribe, hold on, let me just throw a link to that in here. And I really wish you guys could have seen the actual presentation. I need to switch back to Zoom so I can screen share. I thought Facebook would let me screen share and it did not. So I'll post a link to my sign up form. And so as soon as I schedule that PCM session, you'll be the first person to hear about it. All right. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a great night.